Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of the great millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Hakim and Aqua. May listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to just read through this article that I found on the cbc.com, and it says ChatGPT may help you find information faster, but you learn less. So I kind of just wanted to pull out some key points in regards to this ChatGPT. So what I'll do is I'll read out the article and do a little bit of commentary, and then that will be the conclusion of the lesson, right? So here it says, so chatbots such as ChatGPT can provide direct answers to your questions. And it says that seem complete and comprehensive, but a new study shows that compared to a regular Google search, the amount of knowledge gained is less. Excuse me. And it says we have become accustomed to looking up information on Google, and when working on projects or just having casual conversations, want to have verify an argument, Google normally responds by referring to a number of websites that deal with the topic, which you have to go through and pick out the information that you are looking for. So essentially what they're describing is, before, with all these different, AI search engines like ChatGPT, you have Grok, you have Consensus AI, you have DeepSeek, so on and so forth, which gives you a pick, like I don't want to say a summary per se, but it gives you a bit of a rundown of what it finds online, right? So, but in comparison to how, okay, I guess I don't want to say an ancient way, but an older way was, for people to actually sort through the websites themselves. So now you start to see that, okay, there is a bit of a, not necessarily a dumbing down, but there is a bit more convenience when using these AI chatbots, and as a matter of fact, I'll keep reading that. I'll make what I have to say. And it says, on the other hand, chatbots which have access to huge data sets are large and use large language models can sift through all that material for you and spit out an answer in a conversational and more personable way, because the AI chatbot is programmed to sound like a human and give you a thorough result, and tendency is to accept it at face value. And that's true, because sometimes very complex topics, what it'll do, if you provide the right prompt, what it'll do is it'll kind of customize the information, depending on the audience who's speaking. And that's a very interesting development that it has, right? So say, for example, if you wanted to understand something a bit more complex, you can ask the AI prompt, you can insert in the AI prompt, basically put it as if you're a 5-year-old, right? Especially if it's a topic you're not very familiar with, right? But let me just continue reading here. It says results would then analyze how much participants had actually learned, and it says how likely they were to follow their own advice. So it says researchers across 7 experiments, those who used regular Google search provided longer, more thoughtful presentations, usually using richer, more varied language than those using ChatGPT, right? And this is an ongoing thing that I've noticed, even with like college and university, or even students in school. So essentially there's a dumbing down of the generations that come after, I would say like millennials, because in this society, it's just really just about creating a nation of workers rather than a nation of thinkers. So there is no desire for people to actually critical think and actually, search things out. Essentially, have that spirit of a Berean, right? And that's a vibration that the apostles always push, is essentially, a proving all things, as the scriptures say, right? And then, seeking out and gathering the information for yourself that you may be persuaded in your own mind, right? So, as a matter of fact, let me get two precepts on that in regards to the search of information. So my first one precept here I wanted to get is in Sirach chapter 7. Where was it? I think it's verse 15. This is Sirach chapter 7 verse 15, and it says, "Hate not laborious work, neither husbandry with the Most High Yahweh Bashmiel Shai hath ordained," right? So, just to add, to solidify the point, because as a matter of fact, let me get the word laborious, right? Because, it is a labor, to essentially seek out the information. One of the things I remember even being in school was that, for particular topics like mathematics, what they will do is they'll you might have a question, but they always want you to basically kind of show your work and justify, to justify your answer, right? So it's the same sort of mentality when you think about it with the like the scriptures. Like, okay, we know certain things, but then being able to actually prove it is the laborious portion, to line up precept upon precept and line upon line and so on and so forth, right? Laborious, because I think that's also something the apostles also say, not to essentially be a parrot, right? So to actually gather your own understanding, right? So laborious basically means, in the etymology here, so it says hardworking, industrious, arduous, wearisome, hardworking. From the Latin, it says laboriosus, toilsome, wearisome, troublesome. It says inclined to labor, industrious, toil, exertion, costing much labor, burdensome. It says resulting from hard work, right? So that's likened unto, if you think about it, it's to get more understanding. It requires a toil, it requires a labor, it requires study, it requires discipline, it requires just essentially a lot of dedication. And this is the vibration our apostles and elders constantly push. And at the same time, that is not a vibration that you see with this convenience of AI chatbots and so on and so forth. Yes, we do use these things, right? The scriptures do say use the word and not abuse it, right? But that is a discipline, and that is a mentality that you don't get by constantly using the AI chatbots too, because it's very, very, it has its limitations. And one of the limitations is that even though you might get a summary, you still might have to go in a little bit deeper. You might have to rephrase certain questions, ask more specific prompts, and even take certain concepts of what it gives you and actually go a little bit deeper into what is actually being said, right? So that is part of that labor, that is that toilsome, that worry, that burden, right? To essentially, to feed the flock of the Most High, right? So, that is that is that, I guess, the difference, and that is a vibration that our apostles always push, is that laborious, work, right? It says here, it says, even though one of the experiments involved using a version of ChatGPT with plenty of links and references, only a quarter of the participants actually clicked a single link. So what's happening, when you see with a lot of these people, that use these what's it called, these tools, it's making all the convenience, is basically making them lazy, right? Think about the labor of love is It's like gardening. If you think about it, gardening is it's also laborious and toilsome work. Working outside, you're on your knees sometimes, it's hard on your back. You're in the sun, you're dealing with the elements, and it's the same similar vibration. You have to toil, you have to break up soil. Sometimes the soil is very, very hard, so like it is a very, very laborious duty, right? But that is just one of that's just part of the discipline, right? And that is something that what a lot of these people, they don't acquire because they don't have that discipline, and they don't have that I don't want to say drive, but they don't have that characteristics of somebody who is constantly toiling, right? um so what I'll do, another thing. Okay, I'll just read a little bit more here. As a matter of fact, I'll get another precept actually. I did have a second precept. Oops. I did have a second precept to this point about labor. Let's get it. This one's one of my favorites. This is Sirach chapter 38, verse 24, and it says, "The wisdom of a learned man cometh by the opportunity of leisure, and he that hath little business shall become wise. How can he get wisdom that holdeth the plough, and glorieth in the goad, that driveth oxen, and is occupied in their labors, and whose talk is of bullocks," right? So it's this is the importance of much study. It's a laborious work, but it shows you the comparison between um hard working duties like blue collar work like farming, gardening, you know and comparing it, to the toil that we do, in the ministry, right? With either it might be putting together lessons and studying, and then constantly going rinse and repeat and so on and so forth. And the Apostle Paul always says this, for repetition is the father of skill, right? So constantly, going through old things, going through old breakdowns and studying, right? That's how you become very well-rounded. That's how you become very disciplined, right? So there's a lot of characteristics and traits that a lot of these people, don't develop, and that's why you have a lot of people. They scoff when they hear certain things because they haven't actually, excuse me, they don't have that that discipline to actually search things out. And the scriptures say that also. As a matter of fact, another one this came into my mind too. This is why you have a lot of people that scoff when they hear certain things because it's alarming to them. And it says, this is Sirach 21 verse 15, and it says, "If a skillful man heareth a word, he will commend it, and add unto it. But one that hath no understanding heareth it, it displeaseth him, and he cast it behind his back. The talking of a fool is burdensome in the way, but grace shall be found in the lips of the wise," right? So, to a lot of our people, what we might say, what the prophets, the apostles, the elders would say are things that are shocking to them because, they haven't toiled to actually gather this understanding. They haven't taken on that characteristics of an ant. If you know one thing about ants, and I think Proverbs even talks about this, it's a very laborious animal. As tiny as it is, it's very hard working, right? It's not a lazy animal like a sloth, right? So another point I also wanted to hit, I didn't really want to get so much into the article, but basically in a nutshell, it just touches upon the dumbing down, for the sake of convenience, to a lot of these people. This is why the scriptures talk about like gross darkness to people, right? Another aspect of this also is that Esau is the one that creates these different tools, and he's a base man. So there's certain mysteries, there's certain um how do you call those things, mysteries, um dark sayings, so on and so forth, that is not going to be received by people of a carnal understanding, right? So what I wanted to do, I wanted to go to what's it called, this is First Corinthians chapter 2 verse 12. And it says, now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of the Most High, that we may know the things that are freely given unto us of the Most High, which things we speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, right? And there's a lot of things that that you might get on when it goes to pertaining to things, in regards to, I don't want to say history, but even it could even be history also, right? There are certain things that are beyond man's wisdom, right? For example, when we say, for example, things like America is a reincarnation of the Roman Empire because it borrows tenets and it borrows customs, it borrows whether it's, I don't want to say gods can be included in that too, but a lot of the differences, what made Rome very different from those different other four empires. America is in that same spirit of the ancient Roman Empire, just the way that they did particular customs, their different two-party system, the practice of inauguration, the use of Roman numerals, the political infrastructure, the fact that you have, well, you don't have, they're not called Caesars in America, they're called presidents, but the same sentiment applies because they don't have a monarchy. And that's what made Rome very different from those different beasts that Daniel discussed. But at the same time, America is in that same spirit, right? And this is these are things that are freely given to us. One second. These are not particular concepts and points that you would hear in schools, because they're not actually applying the spiritual application to what's presently going on today, right? So those things would be very mysterious to the common folk, to regular Israelites. I might hear these particular talking points, right? This is verse 13, and it says, which things we speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Spirit teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. And it's true. We don't comparing, like, for example, like the point I just brought up earlier, that's a spiritual comparison, to compare the way America is to how Rome was, right? Than them actually doing the same, having the same problems. I'll give you another example. Now, in 54 AD, the Emperor Nero, he debased the currency, right? So basically, when I say debasing the currency, it basically means that the currency, they had a primary silver coin known as the denarius. Now, the denarius is not as valuable as it used to, because he chose to make it more inferior by cheapening and mixing more inferior metals, as opposed to it being primarily made of silver, right? So, and if you look at the way, when you follow the history of events in America has done the same thing. They used to have a gold standard, right? But when President Nixon was in power, he removed the gold standard. So now you have a bunch of this they had a saying back then: the dollar is as good as gold. Now the dollar is not worth anything, right? So it costs a lot more dollars to get something, to get like your day's wage, so to speak, as opposed to how things were prior to that removing of the gold standard. So when you see, these are spiritual things, making these spiritual comparisons, and it really takes somebody spiritual to actually perform these things, because this is information that you're not going to get you know in a what do you call those things, like seminary schools, institutions of higher learning, because they're all about things they can strongly prove, like factual evidence, right? Right? But there's a spiritual realm of understanding that is, very, very heightened, that is freely given to us because of, through Yahweh Bashem Shai, to be able to see these things, because we're being spiritual, right? This is verse 14, and it says, "But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of the Most High, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he that is spiritual judgeth all things. But he himself is judge of no man," because not a lot of most of the people you might interact with are carnal, right? A lot of the information that you would probably get in ChatGPT, although it may be useful for looking up certain things and you do your own diligence and research, you're not going to get spiritual comparisons with AI chatbots. You're not going to get that. So this is another limitation as to, the lack of information of what people might get. They look at it and they go to these things, to AI, to all these different chat GPT, servers, to be able to look things up. But there's a spiritual application of things that are going on that people are not in tune with, unless they're actually being spiritual themselves, right? So the last point I wanted to hit in regards to the limitations of the chat GBT, and you're learning a lot less. Yes, and this is just a disclaimer, right? These are things that we use, but one of the things I've noticed as well is that a lot of information, you're not going to get a very well-rounded amount of information. Another reason is because it lacks prophecy, right? It lacks an understanding of prophecy, and you can only get that in one particular place, right? So I'll use this as an example, because I actually did this prior to me making this lesson. Was that I typed into ChatGPT, what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel, and who are those people today, right? And it came up with this assumptions. It said that the northern kingdom, they, after they got dispersed, they went, they settled, some of them are in would be considered Palestinian, so-called Arabs, so on and so forth, right? And and then when I scroll down to the end, it made a list of people who it cannot be, right? And one of those people, I should say, and had on the list was so-called Native Americans, right? So I thought that was very interesting, right? So there's basically, you're not gonna get the presence of prophecy within ChatGPT, like a thorough understanding, I should say, of prophecy, right? And it just has its limitations, right? So you use at your own risk, but just to show you the importance of knowing prophecies, right? This is Isaiah 34 verse 16, and it says, "Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read. None of these shall fail, none shall want her mate, for my mouth it hath commanded, and my spirit it hath gathered them," right? So none of these prophecies shall fail, right? And what separates the Bible from all these different, I guess you can say, religions and their so-called, I don't want to say holy texts, but their sacred texts to them, is that the Bible has prophecies and it's a living book, right? That's why I wanted to read this, because you're not it didn't give me that understanding of what happened to them. And we know, if you don't know, the prophecy in regards to the so-called Native Americans and the northern tribes, is detailed in the book of Second Ezra, right? So it shows you that these different tools, they still have their limitations, although we use them, but we don't abuse them. That's the point I'm trying to make. I don't want to say like I'm strongly against ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff, but it just it's just to realize that it has its limitations, right? And let me go here, Amos 3. This is Amos 3, verse 7, and it says, "Surely the Lord Yahweh will do nothing but revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets." So the prophets will be the ones that actually have the understanding of what's actually going on in the planet Earth, right? And this is coming from a spirit from above. This is not coming, this is not something that's happening because of ourselves, right? We're being moved to speak on these current events and essentially publish it and make known and make it plain upon tables and give people the understanding of what's going on, right? These are things you're not going to get in the AI chat, chat tools, so on and so forth, right? Because their understanding, and it only kind of corrals you, I've noticed as well, into certain types of understanding. So there are certain questions, if you dig deep enough, there are certain questions sometimes they don't even answer, right? I remember, like, for example, I put in one time, how can you avoid paying mortgage payments? And it was just like, you see the little dots, looking to load, and you don't even see like a proper response, right? So anyways, that's pretty much it. I kind of wanted to touch on a couple points in regards to this whole AI, and realizing it's yes, I'm not saying I don't use it. I'm just throwing out key points here. The spiritual aspect, you're not going to get. Prophecies and details into prophecies, you're not going to get. And it promotes a very microwave type of mentality, right? As opposed to like how the apostles, they would talk about how they would have to go to the library years ago, and then actually search out the information. That's a real labor, right? And a real toiler, right? So that's pretty much it. But I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.